What makes LinkedIn the most powerful B2B platform there is available on the planet today is just one really core feature. So what's the one thing that really makes LinkedIn the powerful B2B platform it is today? And that one thing is the ability to find your target market using their search functionality. So there's 1,000 things that let you find and communicate to people, but on LinkedIn, what's special about it is it lets you find people who are most likely to be the people that are experiencing the pain that you solve, and you can reach out to them and start those conversations. And what I'm talking about is things like the search functionality, but specifically things with Sales Navigator. Sales Navigator is so powerful. The best feature, I think, is the ability to drill down on people's titles, but then also all the other functionality around, what industry they work with, how senior they are, how long they've been working there, what location they're in, how active they are on the platform. It's unbelievable. So in this video, I'm doing something a little bit different. I've actually included the entire Sales Navigator lesson from my coaching program, which is a paid program. It's $3,800. But so many people have been asking how to use Sales Navigator, and people asking all these different questions around how to generate leads on LinkedIn. It really comes down to how well you can find the right person. So I've actually included in this video is going to be the entire lesson. It's pretty involved, so just be warned, it does go for a little while. But I just wanted to do this bit of an intro to let you know that I've included this. And whilst the user interface has possibly changed, LinkedIn rolls things out in stages. So some people may see this interface, some people may see the new one, but the core rules remain the same. So I really hope you get some value from this. It's super involved. It's going to cover everything you need to know about Sales Navigator, and I hope you enjoy. Cheers. Hey, how's it going? Ryan Caswell here, and welcome to your next lesson all around finding your clients on LinkedIn. So this lesson, like the last one, is going to go over finding your prospects, finding your clients, finding your target market on LinkedIn. But unlike the previous lesson, we're going to be going into a little bit more detail here, how to use specific filters, how to use Sales Navigator specifically. And it's a little bit less high level and more nitty gritty. So we're going to be going over how to define your client so that you can find them on LinkedIn, some of the filters on Sales Navigator, your 2 best friends on Sales Navigator, limitations of Sales Navigator, and then we're going to be going into building your first base list and campaign. And then if it's required for you, this is only for specific people, doing company or account searches. All right, so let's start by defining your client. So when it comes to defining your client, the best place to start is just a blank piece of paper and start to write down ideas. So you want to start mapping out the different strategies you're thinking of and taking in terms of your outbound lead gen. You don't need more than one specific strategy. So say you're targeting decision makers, SME, that's enough. But some people might have lots of different approaches. They might be targeting consultants, founders, being more bit specific, targeting owners. You just have a way to map everything out. So for each strategy you're thinking of, write down the location, the industry, the headcount, and the department or function, and the title of the specific person that you're trying to target. So just to work along with you, just copy these. And as an example, if I was to start mapping out a strategy, I might say, all right, I'm targeting owners of SMEs. All right, let me just make sure that actually copied. There we go. And in this, I might say, all right, well, location is, let's say, Australia-wide. If you're not limited by location, you might say worldwide. If you are limited, you might put Sydney or as an example. Industry, you might not have a specific industry, or you might need to do a little bit more research on that, and we'll touch on that in a bit more detail. At the moment, we're just getting the categories or the titles out so that you have something to think about, something to start mapping out to. Company headcount. So what size company are you looking to work with? So let's say 10 to 50-ish. Don't have to be perfect. It's just a starting point at this stage. Department. Now, owners could fit into a number of different departments. So you might just put a question mark. Or if you're targeting HR, you might say HR specifically. Everyone's going to be different here. And just having these titles is going to be a great starting point for how to find who you need to find for your campaign. Now, title is probably the most important one in terms of finding the right people. I'm going to give you a lot of different terms and ways to find people, but let's just say owners to begin with. And we might uncover that we want to target more than that. That's fine. But this is kind of what we want to be thinking in terms of lining up with the filters that we can use on LinkedIn. There are more, but these are kind of the core foundational filters that we're going to be using. So let's come back. So the first thing I would suggest doing is start by looking backwards. Look over your past clients and then locate them on LinkedIn, and then investigate similarities between your clients. You know, what are they calling themselves? What industry are they in? What does their activity tell you about them? What specific things can you learn, and what similarities can you find by looking at your clients on LinkedIn? And by knowing this, we can sort of reverse engineer and start to say, oh, okay, well, if these are the kind of people that I've worked with, the kind of people that resonate with me, maybe that's a good starting point in terms of who I should be looking to find. And you might start to strip out some of the information you find and start adding it under these titles here. Now you might be thinking, well, I'm not sure who my target market is, or maybe you're new and you haven't really gotten your message and your services out there yet, and you're still not 100% sure who the best person is to work with. So the best thing to do is make an educated guess and keep your filters fairly broad on Sales Navigator. For example, if you don't know the exact title of your potential client or decision makers, but you know they work in HR, then you might just want to do a search on HR and see what kind of titles come up. And then when you see what kind of titles come up, you can start to say, oh, well, those are really relevant, those are irrelevant, and you'll start to get an idea of what kind of titles to include. So we're going to be jumping in and out of Sales Navigator, doing lots of little examples as we go here. So, for instance, if you were to do that, and I will go through all of these in detail, but like I said, it's good to just put that to an actual example. So you might put human resources, geography, Australia, so you don't have the most giant list in the world. And then you can start working through and start to see, okay, what kind of terms and titles do people call themselves? If everything's relevant, then great. The list is relevant and you don't have to do much more than that. But if you're starting to get lots of things that are irrelevant, or only a few specific roles that are relevant, then it makes sense to either say, all right, well, these are the types of people I need to look for, or these are the kind of people I need to exclude. And we'll talk about how to exclude people from a filter shortly. So that's just an example of how you can start to have a brainstorm on different titles by keeping it pretty broad in the beginning. Another example, similar to the example on the department, is if you know someone works in events, then just put events in the title and see what other titles come up as well. So we'll get rid of this title. marketing events manager, events lead. So you see what I'm saying is if you keep it fairly broad, if you're not 100% sure on how to be really targeted in the beginning, just keep it broad and do a bit of a brainstorm and see what other roles comes up. And it's going to give you more ideas on who to target and who's relevant. Now, it's also worth noting, if you're not, like I said, if you're not 100% sure what industries you work in, but you know there are relevant industries and there's irrelevant industries, then what you can do is, so on LinkedIn, if you come into industries, you'll notice there's a whole list of different industries. It is actually a finite list. So there's not an infinite number of different lists based on how people spell it or whatever. These are actually defined categories. And you can get them. I've actually included it on a resource that I've attached below, but you can just find it by saying LinkedIn industry. I think it might be the first one, industry codes. And what you can do is just start scanning through this list. And as you scan through it, you can just copy out all the relevant ones to you so that when you start building out your list, you can start using them. What might be easier though is as you build out your list is just check, work through it, and then add them in here. So let's say human resources, marketing, advertising. You get the idea. The point is that if you aren't sure what industries exist, just open up this website. Like I said, I'll include it in the resources, and you can start to scan through and include all the lists, all the industries that your customers could potentially exist in. And if you want a copy of the resource with everything in it, so just head to b2bleads.com/SNR, and I'll put the link below. And I'll have a whole bunch of useful information. So there's that link there to all the different industry codes. And I'll be talking about all these other different useful resources and naming conventions and codes in just a minute. Another thing to consider when you're trying to define your client is that those who pay the bills aren't always the target market and vice versa. So you want to try and target people with the most buy-in to the service or the product that you're providing so that they can either drive the decision up the ladder or down the ladder. So if you're selling, let's say, a technical software SaaS solution, it probably doesn't make sense to go to the head decision maker or the CEO with it if it's not solving a specific problem that he encounters on a daily basis. He's probably just going to see it as another cost, another complication. But if you reach out to the staff that are actually going to be using it, maybe engineers, maybe IT professionals, and get their buy-in, then there's a potential that they'll drive that up the line. So what you want to do is think, all right, who's am I solving the problem for, and how do I drive that up the line? And vice versa, you might have a product that is for a decision maker's team, but it's the decision maker who's actually feeling the pain. And so he's going to be the one to implement it rather than the team. They might be reluctant to accept it. So really just have a good think about who's the problem am I actually solving? Make sure that they're going to be your target market to reach out to. And some other strategies to think of is that there are more than one way to generate clients on LinkedIn. What I mean here is that going directly to your clients, whilst that's a very effective strategy, isn't the only one. And you may want to look at possibilities of joint venture partnerships, because these can have huge outcomes. If you can reach out to someone who has a similar client base to you, but they don't have a competing product, then there's this potential, if you can build a good relationship and demonstrate the potential of your service, then what you can do is potentially leverage their existing network, their existing audience, rather than having to build your own from scratch, and vice versa. So there's another strategy there in that you can actually reach out to people who already have a network as a way to add value to their existing clients. So let's have a bit of a more detailed go through all the filters on Sales Navigator. So let's just jump into Sales Navigator and have a bit of a look and explanation. So I'll just get rid of everything here and start from the start. Some of them I never use, so I'm going to brush over pretty quickly. So keywords can be a useful one. So what this means is it looks for keywords basically anywhere in the person's profile. And that can be really useful if there's a specific maybe experience on software that's a very specific word that just wouldn't be used anywhere. You'd be able to find that by typing the keyword and seeing if that person has that experience. The problem is if it's a broad keyword or something that should be more targeted towards their title, then it is a lot more broader than a lot of these other filters. So it can be really useful, but if you can be more specific on where you're actually looking, then I would suggest using these. And this is, does it searches based on a string? So it needs to be the right spelling to find it. And you can do some rules in here. You do a Boolean search. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later, where you can actually write rules where you say, let's say you're looking for people with sales in their profile and director. And then you might say they need to have sales and director in their title, or general manager. So if you remember back to your high school maths, anything in the bracket is treated entirely, and then that compares that entire statement against this one. So as long as they have either sales and director anywhere in their profile or the term general manager, then it will find them. Now I like to encase things in double quotation marks when using a longer term or two words or a phrase, just to make sure that, it looks for that exact phrase rather than general or manager somewhere in the title. And you don't need to, but I'm a little bit obsessive and I feel like it just looks neater and is better when you do it around every term. But you just definitely don't need to, but I still like to. Maybe a bit of OCD. So that's it for keywords. Now, custom lists isn't something that I really ever use. Past lead and account activity, once again, nothing I use. I'm not going to go into any detail on things that I never use, only the things that I see provide the most value. So geography is pretty straightforward. Australia, if you're looking in Australia. UK, if you're looking in UK, USA, United States of America. It's typing the wrong one. It's pretty straightforward. Now, relationship, we talked about this in the previous video. First degree are people who are connected to you. Second degree are people who are connected to your connections. And third are a degree separated again. Group members are members of specific groups. I never really use that. I only really use first, second, and third degree connections. And each one is mutually exclusive of the other. So first degree can't be second degree, and second degree can't be third degree. Now, for the purposes of setting up a standard campaign, we're only going to be looking at second and third degree connections. Later on in week 5, you might want to set up a first degree campaign, and then you would look at first degree. Company, you can put the company names in that you want to look at. Now, once again, this is based on a text search. So it has to use the exact or the correct text that the company has actually used. And sometimes companies can use different ways of spelling it and things like that. So NAB should bring up everyone that works at NAB as an example. But that it might also be written as National Australian Bank. So NAB wouldn't bring up everything, but it might also be written as it out in full as well. Now, company searches will search for keywords based on the company's name. So if there's information within the company profile that you need to filter or search on, that's where you need to do a different search. You need to do a search on an account and then find the people who work at those. But if you're just looking at industry and you can make an assumption based on the keywords that exist in a company, or you have a finite list of companies, then this is going to work fine, and you can just do a lead search for the people specifically. Industry, pretty straightforward, is the industry that you want to look in. So most of us put in the obvious ones that we can think of, but once again, it's worth having a scan through this list just to make sure you're not missing any. There are some pretty obscure ones there. And I know every time I go through this, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that one is actually relevant and I could have a look at that, or I could work with people on that. So definitely worth having a scan through that. Make sure you're not missing any industries. Where was I? All right. Company headcount, obviously a really important one. Are you working with self-employed, all the way up to 10,000 plus? It's really good to segment your lists, especially for specific campaigns, on being more specific towards company size. But if you're building out, say, a base list, so just a really giant list that you'll create your separate campaigns for, then you might just put every single company size that you can work with. Generally, the smaller, the easier it is to get a response, and the more responsive they are. But the bigger ones, whilst they may not be as responsive, you generally have a higher customer lifetime value once you get in. Seniority level, honestly, I don't use seniority level because that should be dictated by the specific titles you're looking for, or you can go into years of experience. So you can use it if you like. I don't actually use it. I find it just creates, so say you have a seniority pool and then you have a title search, it'll only bring up people that fit into both. So it does depend on how LinkedIn categorizes people's seniority. Function, department, pretty interchangeable basically. So once again, you can target people based on the specific departments. In my experience, if you're being fairly specific on the types of titles, you probably don't need to use function. But if you're going pretty broad on titles, or you are targeting a specific function, then what I would do is target the function and then just put pretty generic decision maker titles in titles. So for instance, and I've got this saved using a text. So you might look for owners, founders, or directors, head of, like decision maker titles within sales as a function. Generally, you don't need to go specific on both. Like I said, if you're being specific enough on the title, then you don't really need to include function too, because people can be, it really just depends how LinkedIn has categorized them, and you might miss opportunities. And then finally for the main filters, tags. So I've got a few tags here. All you need to do to create a tag is add a tag. You can use one of the ones that are already there, or you can create one. Oh, I must have already created it. Test2, create new. And then you can add that again if you do a search, apply. So these two people have been tagged with test2, and then they'll be saved. So what that means now is if I wanted to bring up everyone, I need to refresh this page in order to get it, but yeah, now it is there. It'll bring up only those people with test2. Now there are some other filters too, so I won't jump ahead there. Yes, leave. So if you come down to the bottom of this, you see view all filters, and there's actually some more filters as well here. So if you're targeting overseas and like pretty foreign out there countries, then you can type English as a profile language to make sure that you get reaching out to people that speak your language. Or maybe you're targeting people that don't speak English, something specific. That's a really good way that you can filter out those people. Look at people's schools. Once again, seniority. A lot of these are covered again. Current years in position can be useful, or years of experience. This is a really good way to, if you're pretty broad on the title, you can start to bring in more experience by saying, oh, I only want to look at people with more than 10 years of experience. So that's a good one that isn't on the main filter, but is quite useful. Past companies can be useful. And that I don't really use, but in here, this is probably the one I use the most, or there is one based on the company type where you can actually talk about, public company, not-for-profit, things like that. So that can be quite useful as well. I'll just exit that. Yes, leave. So that gives you a bit of an idea on the different filters and how you use them. So let's talk about your two best friends when it comes to Sales Navigator. And we'll start talking about Boolean searches. So I mentioned it briefly before, Boolean search. So Boolean search is a function that you can use on some of the Sales Navigator settings, not all of them, only the ones that are text. So the ones that have a finite list of categories like industry or company size or relationship to you, you can't use a Boolean search because there's only a select number of things that you can choose from. But for anything that uses text search, you can use a Boolean search. So this lets you set rules to find types of people you are looking for rather than every single exact term. So let's take a look at an example on the provided resource. Oh, I've already got it open. So come down to some useful title Boolean searches. And here's a great example of a rule that you can set up to find any decision maker, really. So director, head of, chief, CEO, manager, GM, founder, owner, partner, president. These are pretty much all the main decision maker titles that I can think of, and a really great way if you're trying to find decision makers within a specific function or industry. So that's an example of a Boolean search, but you can be a little bit more, I guess, tricky or a little bit more skillful than that as well. So these are obviously just listing, look for this person, or this, or this, or this, or this. And same here, this is a little bit more specific, head decision makers. So we remove things like head of and manager, only looking at directors, chief executive officers, CEOs, general managers. But this rule here will let you be more specific on, let's say, decision makers within a specific function. So what I mean, let's say, for example, as an example, I'm just going to remove all these. Or just keep the head count just to keep it simple and remove the tags. All right, let's say, for example, you wanted to target, or in the past, your clients have been sales directors, director of sales. Now, if I was to put that in the title, director of sales, director of sales and marketing, director of sales, you see there's so many different ways that you could write that. And it's like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to list out every single title. It's a huge pain in the butt. Plus, there's a whole, just because you haven't worked with other decision makers in sales or other types of titles doesn't mean that you can't work with them. So what this rule does here, and this resource, you can use these, and I'll put any other useful searches or Boolean searches for titles I'll include here that you can search for and use later. But in this example, what it allows you to do is say, all right, well, look for every possible combination of director and sales. And you say, well, there might be other people who are relevant to me in head of sales or chief executive officer, head of sales, sales manager, president of sales, partner sales. Like, you see where I'm getting at, and you can start to bring in a lot more without having to write hundreds of different combinations of that specific title, which is just crazy. Pop that in there. And there you go, head of growth and sales. Like, some of these titles, you would just never guess the exact combination in a million years. This brings up everyone that's relevant. Really, really, really useful. And like I said, one of your best friends on LinkedIn. So you don't have to use these exact terms. It's up to you, but this is a great way to structure out the rules. So the last one doesn't have an or, obviously, in order to include them all. This is just so it's laid out neater for you, but really this is how it kind of should be laid out. It's comparing each rule in the brackets. So you might be looking for decision makers in marketing, and you might even do something completely different. You might say, look for people with a combination of engineering and assets, or manager, assets and manager, and things like that. It just depends on who you're trying to target. But once again, great way to bring in a lot of different, really specific people without having to list every single title. Very powerful. Best friend on LinkedIn. Your other best friend on LinkedIn is what's called a negative search. So let's say within a specific search filter, you're getting old mate here who's great value and is exactly who you want to work for, and then Sleazy Pete here who keeps turning up in your filter and you want to find a way to get rid of him. So let's take a few examples just to show you what I mean by using negative searches. So the first one, we'll talk about excluding recruiters or consultants. And then in the second example, I'm going to be talking about finding the remaining people within a location. So in this search, well, let's just be a little bit more generic. Let's say we're just looking for people with sales in their term. Now you want to look for sales professional as an example, but you don't want to look at people who serve the sales industry. So let's say this is going to bring up people in recruitment who recruit to sales if that's what's in their title. So what you can do is once you add a filter to your filter, you can actually remove it now by clicking the little, that's weird, by clicking that little cross symbol, the no smoking symbol. So now it's looking for sales professionals, but excluding anyone who comes in that also has recruitment. So I'm going to make the list smaller just to try and prove or demonstrate my example a bit more detail. Brisbane, let's only look at second degree connections. All right, so if we're only looking at, let's say we're only looking at people in sales, title, sales, 2K plus, or 834 if we want to be specific. We could remove people that say recruiter. If I put recruiter in, it adds a few more people to it. But then if I exclude that, well, it wasn't a very good example. There's hardly any recruiters in this example. Let's try and find something that gives me a bit more bang for my buck. All right, let's say consultant. We don't want to deal with consultants in this example. So that brings up a lot of extra people. So first it adds it to your list, and then you click the little no smoking sign. Whoop, I got rid of the wrong one. So yeah, you can see it reduces it. So it was a bit over 800 before. So that means there was about, I don't know, roughly 100 people that had sales and also consultant in their title. So a really great way to exclude people. Now, what I suggest doing is as you're building a list, say you're going Australia wide, is get the list to lower your location size just so the list size gets small enough that either on this tab or this posted on the LinkedIn in the past 30 days tab, you have a way to see the last pages. Now, that means that it has to be less than 2,500. But the reason you want to see the last pages is because this is generally where the results are the worst. Now, if the results are the worst on the last pages, or if the results are good, it means that the filter is really good. But if you get to the end and the searches are really irrelevant, then it's going to be a lot more obvious as to what terms to exclude. So you might come to the last page and you're like, oh, all these people in residential, that's probably meant to be residential, but it might become really obvious as you get towards the last pages of a search as to what terms it's bringing in that shouldn't be there, and you can start to run more negative filters. So let's say, oh, associate, or you might say, oh, geez, it's bringing in a lot of admin. So we need to get rid of things like admin. And so you can start to build a really tight list, a really specific list, without having to then bring all these irrelevant people in. You can start and having to remove them individually. Now, the other example I was talking about is a lot of people, let's say you could target Australia wide. And there's 14,000 results. Now, what a lot of people do when they run a campaign is they might run them to specific cities just because they give you a nice, convenient campaign size. Now, once you've finished going through all the cities, you're left with lots of smaller locations. But you don't want to have to list every single little location. That's a nightmare, and it's just really not fathomable. So what you can do is say, all right, search Australia wide. And I don't know, some of the big business hubs here. And don't include the cities that I've already run searches on. So basically search the rest of Australia. So another really good example of using negative filters. So your two best friends, Boolean searches and negative filters. Not all of them have negative filters. I mean, there's only 3 to 4 categories here, but you can do it on company, you can do it on industry, title, seniority level, possibly. Like I said, I don't really use it. Really powerful function and help you build really tight lists without having to list every single individual one in this case, or have to go through manually and exclude irrelevant people. So now it's probably worth understanding some of the limitations of Sales Navigator. Now, one of the most annoying things is that it does tend to bring in people with multiple present positions. So what that means is, if I have a look on Sales Navigator, if I look for sales and director, what can sometimes happen is that people have more than one present position. So this is actually looking at people's current titles. You can look at past titles. But because they can have multiple current positions at any one time, it can pull a title from one position and combine it with another. So you can put really specific rules, but it gets a little bit mixed up because it combines titles. So you might be a sales rep in one company and director of I don't know, cheese. I can't think of anything, sorry. But the point is it can sometimes combine titles if they have two titles that match the rules. It doesn't happen too often, and it's not something I would really get too worried about, but just something to be aware of. Now, it's also, like I said, based on how people describe themselves or how LinkedIn categorizes them. Now, people aren't always updating their profiles every single day, and so there is a chance that it's out of date or LinkedIn has categorized a certain category the wrong way. So it's not perfect, but it's still your best chance of finding the right people. Now, as you probably know by now, and this could change, I've seen it change in last year, and LinkedIn changes all the time, the search size limit that you can actually view. So you can build and save lists of 20,000, a million, whatever, but you're only going to be able to access up to 100 pages times 25, 2,500. So just something to be aware of. Third degree connections can bring in strange results. So if we only look at third degree connections, and let's just look at this tab here, the posted in the last 30 days, because I want to get to the last page. Now, what can happen is there seems to be a lot of fake profiles that manage to find their way in. Or people with like only one connection. Sometimes it's a lot worse. But whenever possible, try and target second degree connections whenever possible. The good thing is that second degree connections actually grow as your network grows. But it's worth noting that if you have a really broad term to find and looking for third degree connections, you can get a lot of weird fake profiles in there. So there's a lot of manual activity involved when you want to find people based on an account search or a company search. So I'm only going to go through that at the end because it's not relevant to everyone, but it's something to be aware of when it comes time to building lists based on the company, more specific information in the company and the account. So it's hard to exclude exceptions to the search rules. So if there's someone in your list that is just an exception, the filter's working and it makes sense, you just can't think of a way to exclude them. Maybe you've worked with them before. What you can do is you can't actually exclude them from the list. There's no real easy way because this is a saved search essentially. So it's a saved set of rules. So if you remove them, it doesn't really make sense in LinkedIn's eyes. And because it's a dynamic list, it's always changing based on how people change their titles. It doesn't seem to want to let you just exclude one specific person. So what you can do is create a tag for irrelevant people and apply it. And then what you can do, and you'll learn more about this in when you're setting up your campaigns in week 4 using the software, is you can create a campaign that never gets run, and you can pull in all the irrelevant people. So what you can do is anyone who's irrelevant, if you really want to go through and really make sure you don't send specific messages, is you can tag people as irrelevant. And then what you might do is start a new search. Just put anything in here just to start a search. Come down to tags and then bring in all the people who are tagged as irrelevant. Then you can save that as an irrelevant list. Then when you actually start running your campaigns, you can use the software to bring in all these people, and you're basically blacklisting them. You're saying, don't ever message these people. So you can't actually remove them from a specific search here, but what you can do is blacklist them. And then when you start setting up your software, the automation software to send out messages, just make sure you bring them into your campaign, and then they won't get brought into any future campaigns because it's essentially blacklisting that person from any future campaigns. Don't worry too much if that doesn't make sense, but just know that if you really need to exclude specific people, just create an irrelevant tag, and then you can remove tagged irrelevant people later. Now, if it lapses, you lose it. So if you've got a trial membership, whatever it is on Sales Navigator, or if you let your membership lapse, all of your saved searches, all of the conversations you have had through Sales Navigator inbox will be lost. And when you renew it, it's too late, they're gone. So this is just part of LinkedIn's strategy to keep people on the platform. So there's a few workarounds. So you can actually save lists. So I believe I went through this in the previous video. You just copy the URL, and then you can paste that in a different profile. If you want to share a list, if it's taking you a long time to set up, you put it in a Word document, you can save it for later. Yeah, you can basically save searches that way. Now, it's also worth noting, if you do have a saved list, let's have an example here. When you open up a saved list, you'll see the URL here is referring to a saved list. So if you're trying to migrate that to a different account, that saved ID doesn't mean anything to the new account. So all you have to do is just remove a filter and then add it back in. And now all the rules exist in the URL, and you can save that and then paste it into another account. Don't worry if that all seems a bit too complicated. Just know that if you do let your Sales Navigator subscription lapse, you will lose it. And if you have any conversations on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and what I mean by that is you can actually connect and message people through, when you do it, it does it through Sales Navigator, not your normal LinkedIn inbox. So the best way to do it, if you're going to do this manually, connecting with people, is not to connect here, but to actually go to view them on LinkedIn. And then you can connect with them here. So most people have the connect button there, and then message them through LinkedIn. Now, the software we use to automate the initial messages actually does it through here and does this process. But if you were to do it, just keep that in mind, that if you do it through Sales Navigator, it's going to keep those in your Sales Navigator inbox. So you see there's two inboxes, and it can get a bit confusing. So try and do everything through LinkedIn inbox. Sales Navigator just gives you the ability to message more people without getting restricted by LinkedIn. And the last thing, and I've touched on this before, is that LinkedIn's constantly changing. So I've seen, working on so many different profiles at a time, where 3 different profiles I was on had different user interfaces, because LinkedIn's always testing different things and trying different things. So don't stress out if yours doesn't look exactly like my screen. Just know that the core concepts should be more or less the same, but different buttons might be in slightly different areas. That's just LinkedIn. That just seems to be technology as a whole these days. Just something to be aware of. So let's have a bit of a play and build your first base list. So giant, all-encompassing list, and then creating a campaign from that. So let's take a look at Sales Navigator. What I would like to touch on just quickly as well is naming convention. So for a base list, I like to use the naming convention when I save it as base, so I know it's like the base, the solid list that everything will be created from, or at least specific campaigns will be, and then just a really brief description of the audience. Now, when I'm actually saving a list as a campaign, and this will all make sense as I go through it, I use this naming convention. So 0, maybe 1 for the first campaign, geography, relationship, so 2nd degree connections, 3rd degree connections, both. Activity, or might even be 1st degree connections if you're running a 1st degree campaign. Activity, it's either posted in the last 30 days, so I just put a 30, or NA, not applicable. Size of the company. Industry, multiple, just put multiple, or specific, put specific industries. You don't have to list every single one, but just something to let you know. So when you look at the name, it's very obvious what's in the list. And then title, once again, you might put owners, or you might just put multiple or decision makers, just something that tells you at a glance what the campaign is. And then I put a little approximate list size, so I know, oh, okay, that's how big that list is. So I've got those naming conventions on that resource that I mentioned. And the naming convention here. I actually use a text and save it as a shortcode. So that way I don't have to go back in and look for it and copy and paste it. It's just always there, ready for me to save a campaign. All right, so let's take a look at Sales Navigator and build a really sort of basic example. Now, the interesting thing is with, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Oh, that was bringing up a past list. So let's just start clean and build a really, really simple example of a base list and then creating a campaign from that. So just type in anything just to get started and then clear that out. So it's just completely blank. Remove all these other profiles. Now, the tricky thing with Sales Navigator is sometimes the list can seem too simple to be effective. And I go through all this theory, and then at the end of it, your list could be this. And that could be a great list. It's specific. You're targeting owners. It's targeting a specific headcount that you know that works well for you. And you're targeting people within Australia. So that's a really good example of a very simple list that's actually really effective. And same thing with founder. Like I said, it doesn't have to be complicated to be effective. So if you're targeting founders, then that's all it needs to be. If you're targeting owners, that's all it needs to be. They're very specific titles. They don't really have, multiple different meanings like some terms can. And so this can be really effective. Or you might say, all right, well, I'm actually targeting sort of any head decision maker. So if we come back to our resource here, head decision makers, like, the main decision makers at a company. So I might copy that term, say I'm targeting any main decision maker at small to medium business. And that could be your list. So we target, if we're building a base list, I like to put second and third degree, but really you could put first because we're not creating a specific campaign here, which would need to be either a first degree campaign or a second and third standard campaign, which I want to set up, or it could be an in-mail campaign. But at the moment, we're just setting up a base list. We just want to get the search right. So in this, I might save it as, no, I never actually use alerts. Maybe you will, but I don't. So I'll just save it as base Oz SME decision makers. And that could be it. That could be your base list that you spawn all your campaigns from. Or it might just be one strategy that you want to try out. Now then you say, all right, well, I want to go more specific. I want to create a campaign. I want a starting point. And you go, all right, well, let's start Sydney. And there's still so many results just in Sydney. You're like, oh, wow. And then you go, wow, look, posted on LinkedIn the last 30 days. We know these people are engaged. and there's so many of them, let's start there. But that's still too big for a campaign. It's still over 2,000, 2,500. So we go, all right, well, we can be even more specific. We can only look at second degree connections. You go, oh, wow, there's still so much potential. So it really also depends on how much comes into your list as to how specific you can be or how general you need to be. The list size can kind of determine your strategies as well. So we go, all right, well, like 12,000, that's still too many. So you go, well, maybe I can break up my campaigns and be more specific. And this way I'll learn more. So I might run a campaign to start with just to owners. Now we've got a manageable campaign-sized list. You go, okay, well, that's a great place to start. And because it's kind of 1K plus, you go, well, I'm looking in the posted and linked in the past 30 days. Maybe I can add in the third degree connections just to beef up that list a little bit more. So just to make it a little bit bigger. Doesn't really add much extra to it, but you might get a couple extra people in there, engaged people from second and third. So generally, I'll always include third degree connections in posted in the past 30 days, if I can, because at least I know that they're not fake profiles if they're generally active. Plus I know, if they're active, even if they're third degree connections, it's worth bringing them in if they're third degree connections. And so you might go, okay, well, that's a great starting point. That's a great first list. And then you say, LM name. Go back to the start and just fill in the blanks. You go, all right, well, this will be my first campaign. I'll get it set up and ready. Geography, Sydney. Relationship, second and third. Activity, 30 days. Size of the company, I think it was 1 to 10, whatever it was. Industry, not applicable. Title, owner. And then roughly 1K plus. So now you've got your first campaign to start. So then you might do another offshoot from that base list. Come back to your base list. And you might create a campaign for founders. Or you might go keep it Australia-wide and go specific on an industry you like working in that you've seen the most results in. So you can build more targeted lists, more targeted campaigns. It's really up to you. There's no shortage of different ways you can do it, but it really is up to you. But what I do suggest is creating that base list, that base strategy, that base filter on the people that you want to work with, like all inclusive, and then spawn your profiles off from that. Now, if you're unsure of your search criteria, then ask for feedback in the group, the Facebook group. I mean, that's what it's there for. So you can just post either a screenshot or do a Loom screen recording, state what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to target, and ask for some feedback on your search. So you might just do a screenshot of your search hilt here. You might have to do it in 2 parts, depending on it, or you might just do a Loom recording, or you might just ask for some general feedback. But that's what the group's for. It's to get feedback and to ask. So if you're not sure, if it's not super obvious to you, then reach out to the community. And if I see it, I'll definitely jump on and give you my 2 cents as well when I see it. All right. So that's basically it in terms of finding leads, people, human beings, lead results. And for most people, you can basically stop the presentation now and start building your list, organizing them, writing down who you want to target on your piece of paper, and start building your base list and your campaigns. You might create maybe 2 or 3. You don't have to create more than that, just enough to get you started when you get to week 4 and start setting up your automations, your systems, and campaigns. But some people, it's not enough to search for companies based on their name. They need to search for specific criteria in the company, keywords in the company description, maybe technology used, things that are very specific. If that is you, stay for the rest of this video. I'm going to be going through how to, first of all, find specific companies, specific accounts, and then work your way backwards, find a list of people who work at those companies. And then when you've got that list of people, then it just comes down to doing another filter, like a filter on lead filter on those specific people to build your list for those targeted people based on their company. So if that's you, keep watching until the rest of this video. If that's not you, you can keep watching out of interest. But what I want you to do is go away, build your base list, and start mapping out your strategy to reach out to people on LinkedIn. So for those of you who want to learn how to do account searches, let's go into that right now. Okay, now, as I mentioned earlier, doing an account or a company search to find your prospects is a bit more of a manual process. So I like to think of it or break it out into six steps, basically. So first of all, you need to build a list of relevant accounts or companies in LinkedIn. Now, once you have that list, you then have to go through one page at a time and find all the people who work at those companies. You then need to you need to go into each one of those filters or searches that you create and reduce the list size with an initial filter, tag everyone on all of those lists page by page, create a new lead search with new tags, and then once you get to this point, you just do a normal search and then save that list. That might all sound like hieroglyphics, saying it off the top of my head, but it'll all make sense as we work through an example together. So let's jump into Sales Navigator and do a bit of an example, just so that you can make those steps relate to something. And we'll also be adding these steps as a resource below. So if you check in the resources below, there'll be a link to b2bleads.com/company, and that'll give you a resource with these steps on it that you can refer to later. So to get things started, let's just jump into here. And as an example, I'll do something simple, something really easy. Like, let's say we're looking for companies that deal with ice cream. So there's a whole bunch of ice cream shops worldwide. And let's just bring it back to Australia just to make it a smaller list size. Now, the only time you would do an account search rather than just a regular lead search is if you believe that there are a number of companies that have names that don't have ice cream in the name. So it's hard to, let's say, guess what a company does by its name, and you need to look more specifically into the information, the company's information. It's also worth noting that this is going to look for both ice and cream. So if I do that in double quotation marks, it'll look for exactly ice cream. So yeah, it brings it down slightly, but it's more relevant. So just to give a bit more of a demonstration of what I mean, we're looking in accounts because like we would never be able to guess this name that also deals with Japanese ice cream. See, yeah, you're going to get some irrelevant things in here. But for the most part, you should be dealing with companies that are ice cream based. Like, that's another example. Wouldn't be able to work out from that name that it deals with ice cream, but what we can do is search for keywords in the account description to find ice cream companies. I think you guys get the idea. Now, what we want to do in this example is find all the people who work at these companies. Now, there are a whole bunch of other filters you can use on account search. So you can look at company size. Let's say we were, so you can actually, when you find the right people, then you can go into a company size on the actual lead search. So you don't have to use that here. Oh no, that's department headcount, sorry. Company headcount. Let's say we're looking at smaller companies, 11 to 200. So that brings our list down to 41. That means there's 2 pages of results, 1 and 2. So there's other filters, growth, technology use. I've never found technology use super reliable, maybe for really large companies. And there's a whole bunch of other filters you can use pretty useful. But it just really depends how detailed or specific you need to get on the specific companies. Yes, leave. All right, so now we've got a list. We might save that list if it's a relevant list. We might use it again. So Aussie ice cream shops. So that will be a list. You got saved searches. It won't save it in the same area as your lead results. It'll save it in accounts. Now what we want to do is actually find relevant people that we can contact at these companies. So what we have to do, and this is the part, so if we come back to our steps, the first step was building a list of relevant companies. And that's what we just did. We did some filters and we saved that list. The second step is to find all the people who work at those companies 1 page at a time. Now, just to keep things tidy, I like to just have 1 tab open for this because it starts to get pretty hectic pretty fast. Now you see I've got 2 pages of results. So what I need to do is select everyone, select all. And if there's any specific companies, say there was one, I'm like, oh, well, I know that is relevant. If you want to do that, you can go through and unselect them. And then what you do is you click View Current Employees. So I actually make sure I open it in a new tab because you want to keep this page open. You want to make this as your first page. So I've now created a new tab here with all the employees at these companies. Now, unfortunately, I have to do this 1 page at a time. It's a pain in the butt, but that's how you do it. And then I would do the same thing, select all. I can go through and uncheck anyone I don't want to use, and then open a new tab. It opens a new tab, it opens a new tab. Now, if this was longer, it was 125 per page, I would have to do that 5 times. And if it was longer again, it would be even more tabs up here. So you can see how it starts to add up pretty quickly. Now, I've got 2 pages of results of people based on companies. So now that we've gone through 1 page at a time and found all the people, and we've got them open in these separate tabs, it's a matter of reducing the size with an initial filter. So we might be doing a very specific filter, but you can do a pretty broad filter to just reduce the size of the list because you're going to have to tag everyone, and that's a long process too. So what I mean is, as an initial filter, is let's say you're going to be talking to decision makers, specific decision makers. So we come to our first list of people. We can just come here and put in, just put some really broad decision maker terms in here. So I've got them saved using atext. You can use that resource that's available for download below to put an initial really broad title search on. And that reduces the list fairly substantially. Then you would do that for each tab. Now, the only reason we're doing it this way is to try and reduce the size of the list because we're about to tag everyone 1 page at a time. And if we can bring the list size down, it's going to make our life a lot easier. You can get more specific here, but I like to keep it fairly general so I can be more specific when I have them all in one list to look at and can take my time doing it. So you can see both of these are all the people. So each tab I've put in a general filter. So that's step 3, reduce the list sizes with an initial filter. Then what we want to do is tag everyone. On each of these tabs, we then want to say, all right, let's create a tag. I just put 00 ice cream. That brings it up to the top because it's alphabetical. Ice cream. All right, just remove that. Now what we need to do is go through, select all, tag, ice cream, apply. Scroll all the way to the bottom and do that for each page. Yes, it's a pain in the butt, but think of the money you can be making and the relationships you can be building and the network. Whoop, I wasn't paying attention. All right, cool. Select all. Don't worry too much about being too picky about the people in it. Just go through this process quickly. Select, tag, ice cream, apply. Select all, tag, ice cream, apply. Select all, tag, ice cream, apply. Select all, tag, ice cream, apply. Last page, select all, tag, ice cream, apply. That's one tab down. Now we need to do it for the next tab. This one isn't so bad. Select all, tag. Now, generally you need to refresh in order to get that tag to show up. Select all, tag, ice cream, apply. Select all, tag, ice cream, apply. All right, great. Now, if you had more tabs, you can see how that would add up in time. That's why it's not a bad idea to keep the company list sizes smaller and group them into smaller groups, and then build your people profiles out from smaller company lists. So step 4 was to tag everyone. Now what we want to do is create a new, just a regular lead search and bring in all those tagged people. So we got our account search here. We just come back to lead results. We can keep these tags in, or you don't have to have these, but it doesn't hurt. Then what we want to do is bring in our ice cream people. Actually, we'll remove these. There we go. And it's brought in all of our ice cream people. Now, for some reason, that should be a higher number because we definitely tagged more than 45. Oh, it's because the ice cream is still in the keyword there. There we go. All right, so just be careful of that. So now we've brought in all the people who were tagged as ice cream. And now that is step 5 done. Now all we need to do is we're back to like just running a normal lead search. So if we want to refine this further, we just take what we learned already in the lesson and create our searches from this. It might already be good enough based on our initial filters, or we might want to adjust the filter and be more specific. Relationship, second, third, geography, Australia. And then generally if the list is smaller than 2.5K, you would just save it directly, ready for a campaign. So call it something like 02, Australia, second and third, not applicable, company size, title, industry, ice cream shops maybe, or you might put some more details at the end because it's a more specific search. So that's basically it. It's not super complicated. It's just a bit of more manual, but it gives you a lot more control and allows you to target very specific companies. So give that a go if it's required, but where possible, I do suggest trying to do leads results over finding companies and then the people at them. So you can get that from the resources below if you need to refer to the steps to do a company or an account search. So yeah, if you are unsure of anything, just remember to post in the group. That's what it's there for. You can either use a screenshot or a Loom recording. Just state what you're trying to achieve and ask for feedback on your search. I'll keep an eye out for it and give you my thoughts. So your action items for this video are to create your first base list and filter and search, and then map out at least one individual campaign list that is going to be less than 2,500 that you will use when you set up your lead generation machine in week 4. All right, that's it for today's video. Let's get to work and I'll see you in the next lesson.